Welcome into Locked On Phillies. In today's episode, we recap the Phillies' most recent win in spring training over the Toronto Blue Jays. Zack Wheeler had some very interesting comments about the new pitch clock, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the best player on this Phillies team, your new shortstop. It's time for Locked On Phillies.
You are Locked On Phillies, your daily Philadelphia Phillies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, this is Locked On Phillies. I am your host, Connor Thomas. I want to let you know this episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/Locked On today to get started. I want to thank you very much for making Locked On Phillies your first listen every single day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. We're on YouTube, of course, all your podcast streaming platforms and everything like that. So go ahead and check us out daily. Locked On Phillies. You can follow me on Twitter at ConnorThomas975. You can follow us on Twitter, the Locked On Phillies podcast at LO_Phillies. Let's jump into today's episode because the Phillies are just on a heater down there in spring training. They continue to knock teams off. Today they took on the Toronto Blue Jays and they ended up beating them by a score of 7-2. It was a nice victory for the Philadelphia Phillies. We're going to talk about the offensive side in a little bit and a little bit more about shortstop Trea Turner. But let's start with the man who made his first start of the spring, Zack Wheeler. For my money, he was the most talented pitcher on the team last year. Aaron Nola was the most accomplished because, of course, Wheeler had the issues with his shoulder that kept him out for nearly a month of the regular season. But you look at it and you say, which one of these guys are you going to go with in a final game of a series? Well, I'm going with Zack Wheeler. And that's what the Phillies ended up having to do because his final start was the final game of the World Series. We know how that all worked. We're not going to go back into that decision by Rob Thompson, anything there. We get it. But Zack Wheeler today went 2 innings pitched, just like Aaron Nola went the day before. Very similar stat line. Nola was no hits, no earned, 1 walk, and I believe 1 K. Wheeler was no hits, no earned runs, no walks, 2 strikeouts. Looked great. Everything was awesome. Pitched very well, looked healthy, and that was one of the big questions with the dead arm he experienced and the trouble in shutting him down in a short offseason. Look at Zack Wheeler as a guy to be cautious with, especially in spring training. And I believe he's part of the World Baseball Classic team for the United States. I got to see if he's actually going to throw much for them and everything. But Zack Wheeler is a guy that you have to be careful with. You have to limit his innings in spring training so he's ready for opening day. And in his first action in spring in a live game setting, looked really good. Velocity was fine. Movement was fine. He looked like Zack Wheeler. That's great. I know he's not facing anybody all that special, but he looked like the guy that we saw in the middle of the season last year when he was throwing really well and helping the Phillies to one of the better records in baseball over the course of the middle of the summer. So great work by Zack Wheeler. All that's good. What's more interesting to me than his performance, because we know what we're getting on the mound from Zack Wheeler, is what he had to say after the game. The NBC Sports Plus broadcast, the TV broadcast, went ahead and interviewed him live during the rest of the game. Not for the entirety of the game, but later on in the game. And they talked to him about the pitch clock. And his quote is, I don't like it at all. I think it messes with the game too much. He went on to expand post-game on his comments in-game about the pitch clock and saying, I think in AAA, in the minor leagues, they're playing for stuff, but they aren't playing for what we're playing for up here. Shout out to Corey Seidman of NBC Sports Philadelphia for the tweet on that. Man, listen to that again. I think in AAA, in the minor leagues, they're playing for stuff, but they aren't playing for what we're playing for up here. This is one of my questions with the pitch clock, too. When I talked about it on the radio, on the John Kikay show over on 97.5 The Fanatic, where I work in the mornings every Monday through Friday. I get pitchers having issue with the pitch clock. They're going to have to adjust. That's the thing. They're not going to talk their way out of this one. So Zack Wheeler is going to have to get used to it. He's going to have to figure out how to live in a world where he now has 15 seconds to deliver every pitch he does. That's reality. But what he's kind of saying there as far as the minor leagues and not playing for as much as you have at the major league level, this is where I see issue with the pitch clock, right? If there's anything that I think it's going to cause a major problem with, and I think this is what Zack Wheeler is talking about. Imagine that Bryce Harper at bat from Game 5 of the NLCS last year, where he hits the home run to put the Phillies up, to send them to a World Series. The lead up, the dramatics, the preparation, the thought process that goes into it from both sides, both the hitter and the pitcher. The 15-second pitch clock feels great for innings 1 through 7 in a game in June. What is it going to feel like in October when you have a World Series on the line, when you have a playoff berth on the line, when you have a series like a divisional series or a championship series on the line, and you've got guys rushing through? I forget who it was, but I saw a tweet today that a pitcher in a game was planning on throwing a cutter. He wanted to throw a cutter to the batter, but didn't have enough time on the pitch clock to shake off to that pitch. So he ended up throwing a fastball instead. The tweet made sure to say he recorded the out on strikeout, so it didn't really burn that guy at that point. But that's a situation that I think Zack Wheeler is thinking of, saying, man, if I'm making the biggest start of my life and I'm having the biggest at bat of my life, like, for example, if he had stayed in for that Yordan Alvarez at bat back in the World Series, would he want to deliver a pitch every 15 seconds and feel rushed and not allow the dramatics of the moment to build up? And from a baseball executive perspective, not like a front office person, but like people in the league office for Major League Baseball who are instituting these changes, don't you want the ability for your sport to build that dramatic intensity in the biggest moments? I get wanting to make the average game time faster, but I do also worry about what this rule looks like come playoff time, and if it's something that maybe should just be instituted for the regular season, and then playoffs you get into a situation where you allow pitchers the time, or maybe you institute like a 25-second pitch clock and give them an extra 10 seconds for each. I understand it expands the time of game, but in the playoffs, everything matters more. So I think that's what Zack Wheeler's talking about when he says that AAA, they're playing for stuff, but not what they're playing for up there. They're not playing for the World Series down there in AAA. They're trying to make it up. They're trying to make playoffs. They have playoffs down there, but ultimately it's a stepping stone to get to where those players want to be. Now that you're at the highest level, I agree in some cases, like in some way, with Zack Wheeler about how he's saying that he doesn't like the pitch clock, and yeah, it takes umbrage with it and everything like that. Now, mentally, I don't know that it'll affect Zack Wheeler all that much because he does normally work relatively fast. He's a very efficient pitcher, so I think he'll be fine in practice. I think it's just like if a guy goes out and he pitches really well in a game where it's 40 degrees, that doesn't mean that guy likes pitching in the cold. That just means he pitched well that day. Like, that's what I'm saying. I don't think it'll affect Zack Wheeler, but I don't think he enjoys it, which is fine. He doesn't have to. It's just the nature of baseball and where we're at right now. But very interesting comments from Zack Wheeler when it comes to the pitch clock and what he had to deal with today in his first spring training action, but still looked great. The Phils still won. And coming up, we're going to talk about more offense from, that number 7, Trea Turner, and what he did again in a game that just, I'm telling you guys, get used to. We'll talk about it coming up as we continue Locked On Phillies. First, though, let me tell you about my friends over at FanDuel. The midway point of the NBA season is come and gone. Now's the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because we're in that home stretch of the NBA season. And also because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, super easy to use. And you can bet on everything from the money line to point scorers, threes drained, all that good stuff. The Sixers have had a rough stretch right now. Really good team. They're going on a long road trip, so maybe it's time to bet against the home team a little bit there. Go ahead and check that out. The schedule certainly matters. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with the same-game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner, or sports betting partner, I should say, of the NBA. All right, so you remember how I said to Trea Turner, he's not going to bat like 660 or whatever in the regular season after his first game where he went 2 for 3 with 2 singles and an RBI and a run scored and a stolen base. And I was like, yeah, he's going to be really good. This is what you can expect from him most days, but it's not going to be every day. Guess what? He did it again. I mean, I get it's spring training, but today against the Toronto Blue Jays, Trea Turner again batting in the leadoff spot with Kyle Schwarber behind him, which seems to be how they're going to employ this. 2 for 3, 2 RBIs on a single, later on in the game. A run scored, 667 average for the spring. I just like this. It breaks my brain because in Philadelphia, we've had really good players as of late. JT Realmuto is a really good player. Bryce Harper is a really good player. Reese Hoskins is a really good player. Nola and Wheeler as pitchers are really, really good players. And before them, there were a couple of guys that were really good sprinkled into those rough years during the playoff drought. Like every once in a while, you'd have a good player, but not enough to make it a good team. And then there were years where you didn't have anybody. But the bottom line is Trea Turner is such a luxury. I keep saying I don't know that we're prepared for how good he's going to be. I really don't know that we're prepared for how good he's going to be because it's been so long since we've seen a player like this that can hit for power, that's just going to be consistently the best hitter in the lineup on either side. I know it's spring training, but I'm going to pull up his MVP odds a little bit later on in the week, and we're going to take a peek at where he's currently sitting, because if he does this and he just goes basically like 2 for 3 every other day and he ends up batting around 310 and he leaves the yard more than he did at Dodger Stadium last year because Citizens Bank Park is smaller, and he carries the Phillies with Bryce Harper out, and he plays plus defense, and he does all this stuff that we know him capable of doing, and he steals 50 bags, which is certainly inside, like it's within the realm of possibility for Trea Turner because he steals like 30, 40 anyway with the bases of normal size. Now with all the new rules, it helps him steal more. You could be looking at an MVP in Trea Turner, and you could be looking at JT Realmuto hot on his heels, and you could be looking at Bryce Harper playing at an MVP level when he comes back, and you could look at Aaron Nola and Zack Wheeler as 2 Cy Young caliber arms. I don't know what more to tell you about this Phillies teams, guy. Like, the more I keep watching them in spring training and putting together the pieces and seeing, okay, this guy's working on that, and this guy's pretty good at this, and we're expecting this from Castellanos, and Bohm is leaving the yard, and Sosa seems like a really good replacement, and Josh Harrison's good defensively, and the outfield looks interesting with Brandon Marsh playing good defense and hitting well, and the 2 starting pitchers look ready to go at the top of the line or rotation, and we'll see what Suarez and Taijuan Walker look like, and we'll get to see Painter later this week. Andrew Painter is going to go ahead and get his first action. I believe tomorrow will be his first action. But bottom line is, I'm starting to think, where are the holes in this Phillies team? Outside of outfield depth, which I keep harkening back to, and if Edmundo Sosa can play there, you could take that off the table. This is about as good of a lineup for the Philadelphia Phillies as we've seen in a long time. It's about as good of a roster as we've seen from a Philadelphia Phillies team in a long time. And in fact, tomorrow's episode, we're going to have the 26-man roster version 4, my projections for that. And I have a bit of a bold statement that I'm going to get into with that in mind as we pull players out of the hat and figure out who exactly I'm going to keep on the roster from last time, who's going to get sent to Lehigh if I was the president of baseball ops or the general manager, all that stuff. So we'll get into that tomorrow. But no, I have a huge statement coming up when it comes to this Philadelphia Phillies roster. I know it's not set yet, but the projected roster, the lineup, everything there, as long as everyone stays healthy. Now, Trea Turner, I will say this. I'm going to bring this up about the Phillies in general. Like, while it's nice to see what he's doing now, I also want the guys to all be careful because we saw something today. We got news that Gavin Lux, who's an infielder for the Los Angeles Dodgers, who was going to be part of the plan to replace Trea Turner by aggregate. They can't just put someone at shortstop and have him be just as good, but that Dodgers infield, they took a huge hit by not being able to bring back Turner. So the question is, who's going to fill that void? Gavin Lux was one of the guys that they were looking at in the infield to say, hey, we need you to have a big year for us. He tore his ACL running from second to third yesterday, trying to avoid a third baseman who was throwing the ball to second to try and turn a double play. Just one wrong cut, torn ACL, gone for the year. I mean, this stuff happens in spring. That's why, you remember yesterday I said it's almost like no news is good news is the tenet for spring training, and good news is no news. Well, that's basically what the point of that is. So Trea Turner doing the little things right, the singles and everything. He's going to be consistently this player. He's been very durable through his career, knock on wood. So we hope that everyone gets through injury free. But this team is playing really well right now. I know only a couple of games in, and we still got a month's worth of time until we're at opening day, literally about a month now. But just things to keep in perspective, how these players are doing, how good Trea Turner looks, what he could be, and just the only thing that I see slowing this team down is what you're dealing with health And you already see that with Bryce Harper missing time this year, carryover health from last year. But if this team could stay healthy, they're about as good as the Phillies team as we've seen in a decade. I'm going to be more definitive on that one tomorrow. But you'll have to go ahead and tune into that episode to find out. We're going to go ahead and wrap up here. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what I got into in yesterday's episode. I'm going to dive deeper into the Edmundo Sosa conversation, how important he is to this team, and is he really the most underrated ball player on the Philadelphia Phillies in 2023? We'll discuss that as we wrap up Locked On Phillies. Okay, let's talk about Edmundo Sosa. Edmundo Sosa is a guy in his mid-20s you bring over from the St. Louis Cardinals organization last year. And you bring him in, and the thought is there's two things we knew about Edmundo Sosa. We knew that Edmundo Sosa could play plus defense in the infield, and we knew that he went viral for doing that spin throw to first base that hit an umpire directly in the temple. That's about all we knew about Edmundo Sosa here in Philadelphia when he showed up. Thought, this guy's going to be a utility piece that'll probably be up and down from the minors or probably be on and off the bench. You know what I thought, frankly? I thought he was Ronald Torreyes round 2. Oh, he'll have a moment. He'll have a moment or two. We know he's not an everyday player, so it'll be nice whatever you get from him as a bonus. I think I was way off on that. I think Edmundo Sosa is a really good baseball player, to the point where there are teams in Major League Baseball where he would be a starting middle infielder for them. And the fact that you have a lockdown infield in Bohm, Stott, Turner, and Hoskins is keeping him off the field. But he's an impact player for this team. The power is more than I thought it would be. The average is better than I thought it would be. The defense is as advertised. He's got speed. He plays the game in a fun way. The locker room seems to like him. I'm running down the list of guys, and I really do think Edmundo Sosa could be the most underrated player on this Philadelphia Phillies team. JT Realmuto is not underrated. We know he's the best catcher in baseball. Bohm, properly rated. Turner, properly rated. Stott, properly rated. Hoskins, underrated. But we know what he is offensively. We're just mad at the defense, which is properly rated. Not very good defensively. Kyle Schwarber, probably a little overrated at this point because I don't think he can consistently hit over 45 home runs year in and year out. And he'll need to make up for the type of average he had last year. But if he hits like 35, 40 home runs, we're cool with that. I'm just saying I think the fan base is a little higher on Kyle Schwarber than what he consistently is as a player. Nick Castellanos is properly rated. He's got to earn the trust back. Brandon Marsh, I think, also properly rated. You look at the pitchers. I think we got a good grasp on the starting rotation. Aaron Nola is slightly underrated, but I think that's more the media and how they portray him than what it really is in the fan base's thought of Aaron Nola, because I do think there are a lot of fans of Aaron Nola out there that see him for what he is as a top 15 pitcher in baseball. So that's I don't know that I can call him underrated. The bullpen, everyone's pretty properly rated now that you've settled in and gotten rid of all those other guys. I don't know. I look at Edmundo Sosa and I say this guy might have the biggest opportunity to win over parts of this fan base this year with extended playing time. Now, the hope is that he doesn't get extended playing time. I hope we don't find out whether or not Edmundo Sosa is the most underrated Philly, because that would mean missed time from one of your infielders. And I think everybody else in the infield is either a star already or is becoming a star before our eyes. Stars already are Turner and Hoskins and Realmuto, and becoming one before our eyes are Bohm and Stott. Bohm closer to it than Stott, of course, but further along in his career progression. So I don't want to see Sosa get time over those guys, but I do want to see in his limited time this year, again, praying for no injuries, no major injuries or anything like that, I think Edmundo Sosa will be a huge bat to have off the bench for the Philadelphia Phillies. And you can't understate what it's like to have depth like that and add Josh Harrison into the mix and add Garrett Stubbs into the mix. And, man, this team's deep. This team's talented. The backups are really good. A lot of the backups could have starting claims on other teams that are lower down in league standings. So I feel good about it. And I feel good about saying that Edmundo Sosa is going to have another strong year for the Philadelphia Phillies. And there could be a moment in June or July where we're even talking about if Bryson Stott has a sophomore slump. Is Edmundo Sosa the right option for a little bit at second base? That could be a conversation that's coming. I'm not wishing for that. I want Stott to be great. I want all these players to be great. I'm just saying the Phillies are in a very good spot depth-wise, and when you have depth players pushing really good starters for playing time, that's a sign that you have a well-rounded, well-built ball club. That's what the Philadelphia Phillies have this year. That's going to be an exciting season. That's all for today's Locked On Phillies. And tomorrow's episode, again, we've got my version 4.0, my opening day roster projections. So we'll go through that. We'll talk about a little bit of extra side topics and everything, too, on top of that as well. It'll be a fun episode, so tune in for that. I want to thank you, though, for making Locked On Phillies your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Now make your second listen Locked On MLB Prospects. Lindsey Crosby does great work over there covering the young up-and-coming players in the minor leagues and even in college and everything like that. So check out his work. It's available on YouTube, Odyssey app, Spotify, Apple Music, all that good stuff. Go ahead and check that out as well. Thank you. As always, make sure you're rating, reviewing, and subscribing, all that good stuff. You know the deal. I appreciate everyone who does that, and I will talk to you tomorrow on the next episode of Locked On Phillies.